So ever since I started playing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, one of the hardest things for me to do is build an appropriate and good side deck. That being said, in this video, I'm going to be going over the best side deck options for the meta today and tell you why you should be playing each of these cards in your side deck. So let's go ahead and jump on into it. What's up, Ocean? You got Matt here, and welcome to our competitive Yu-Gi-Oh video. Today we're talking about side deck cards, the best cards to bring in post game one, and which ones you should play in certain matchups. We're also going to be talking about which ones do well in different strategies and why you should be playing these cards in general. We're going to mark them into a tier list from the top tier side deck cards to the really good cards down to the just solid cards in general to niche cards which are very rare to be used but have some uses, and of course the section of why on earth are you going to be playing these cards here. We have 45 cards to cover, so that being said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we get started, make sure to smash the like button, because if we hit 60 likes, I'll know that you're really enjoying the tier list content, that you want to see more. If we hit less than 60 likes, well, then I'll know that you guys want to see other content from me. At the same time, I would love to hear your suggestions down in the comments below, and of course guys, subscribe to the channel as well. We are super close to 1,000 subscribers, which was our end of year goal, and hopefully we can hit it within the next couple of weeks. Alright guys, let's go ahead and jump into it. Here are the best side deck cards for the August 2023 competitive Yu-Gi-Oh format. Let's jump into it. Alright, so here we are back with the tier list. We have 5 categories, top tier for the best of the best side deck cards. We're going to see a lot of application across a wide range of options. Really good, which have a lot of really strong matchups, more so than most, but just have something that stops from being top tier. We then have solid, which have a decent amount of spread across many different matchups, but aren't as impactful as some of the other ones. Niche is for very few matchups in the format, and then why is just, why are you playing this? There are better options. You shouldn't be using this card here. But let's go ahead and just jump on into it with one of the best side deck cards in the entire format being Anti-Spell Fragrance. This card here deserves to be top tier. Most decks that can play Anti-Spell in their side deck do play Anti-Spell. The reason for that is it shuts down so many different decks. Think of a deck like Purely, which relies so much on their spell cards. If you have Anti-Spell up, they lose. If you have a deck like Kashtira, no Pressure Planet, no Theosis, no Birth, any of those cards there, they're gone. Think of a deck like Dragon Link. They can't use their powerful spells either. Fantastic card all around. Next up is going to be Cosmic Cyclone. I think Cosmic Cyclone is a really good card. It is, in my opinion, better significantly than Twin Twister. I prefer to have the 1-for-1 with the life point damage rather than the 2-for-2. And you know what, since we have it here, I'm just going to go ahead and grab Twin Twister and I'll put it into the niche category. I really think that Twin Twister is significantly worse than Cosmic Cyclone in this current format. I think while we do have a good number of back row decks like Traptrix and Labyrinth, which are very strong, I just don't think that Cosmic Cyclone, or that Twin Twister rather, is as impactful, especially considering we have so many other tools to get rid of back row cards. I'd rather have the 1-for-1 aspect of it, and at the same time, if you draw Twin Twister as like your draw for turn 3 or something, you're basically going to lose the duel unless you really needed that one copy of a Twin Twister, I should say. Cosmic Cyclone is a much better card to have access to in case there's a random floodgate. Next up is going to be Droll and Lockbird. I think Droll and Lockbird is a top tier side deck card, a fantastic card to have access to in so many different matchups. You look at decks like Purely, Kashtira, Dragon Link, Vanadium. A lot of these decks here do a lot of searching, so having access to Droll is a really good way to get around those. We then have Ash Blossom, which I think is a really good card. I can't put it into the top tier category because, I'll be honest, really the only reason that Ash is still being played as much as it is because of Branded. If Branded Fusion got banned tomorrow, would Ash be dropped from a lot of lists? Probably. It's really good against a lot of like rogue decks, but not so good against a lot of other meta decks. You really want to save it for very specific interactions, and they can also have the ways to play around that. Next up we have Ghost Bell. I think Ghost Bell is solid, not the best hand trap, but has some applications right now. Really the graveyard hate is not as important in this current format. I think just Bell, especially since Branded Expulsion got banned, you don't really need to have access to it that much. Then we have Effect Veiler. I think Effect Veiler is a solid Yu-Gi-Oh card as well. Solid in the side deck. It's good on decks that can actually draw during your opponent's turn. So think of something like Vanquish Soul or Plunder Patrol or something. Those decks draw a lot on your opponent's turn. So having access to a card to be able to activate right away is great. It's targeted effect negation, which has a lot of good applications. And I do think that in certain ways it is better than Imperm, but as a whole, I'd rather have Infinite Impermanence than Effect Failure. Next up is going to be Evenly Matched. This card is one of the cards I was talking about when I was talking about the Twin Twister. Why I play Twin Twister when you have evenly matched, or Cosmic Cyclone when you have evenly matched. This card is so good across so many different applications. It is able to get you, it just equalize the board state pretty easily, has a lot of good matchups that it's great against, and it forces out negations at the bare minimum, which is absolutely amazing. Next up is going to be Book of Eclipse. I'm putting this into the niche category. The reason why it's going niche is because while the card itself is a good card, it's really only good against one deck, and it's going to be Kashtira. And even then, you probably want to run now Book of Moon for that, or Kurikara. There's a lot more better options than Book of Eclipse, because the card, it loses to Ash Blossom. If you don't get rid of all the face down monsters, your opponent will draw cards. It becomes really challenging to use effectively, and it's not as good offensively as it is defensively. Next up is going to be Dimensional Barrier. I think this card here is another top tier Yu-Gi-Oh side deck. The side deck card, I should say. The reason why is because think of all the decks in the format right now. Pretty much all of them, outside of like Sprite, and even then Sprite has a hard time with it, just lose to D-Barrier. If you're going D-Barrier against Dragon Link calling Synchro, they're gonna have a hard time getting to Barone or Despater. If you go D-Barrier calling Synchro against Sword Soul, or Xyz against Kashtira, or Xyz even against Sprite, or Xyz against Purely. Oh my god, it's just absolutely insane and can just win the game on the spot. Other decks don't really care, but in a mirror match, it can be a little bit tricky because it negates the effects of the Synchro monsters on your side of the field. So if it's like a Synchro, what is it called? Oh my god, I'm blanking on it. A Sword Soul mirror match. If it's a Sword Soul mirror match and you have a D-Barrier set and you call Synchro, you're negating your own Synchro monsters, which is a little bit tricky too. Now that could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing, it depends on the board state of course, but keep that in mind. Next up is going to be Infinite Impermanence. I think this is a really good Yu-Gi-Oh card. I think it sees a lot more play in the main deck than it does in the side deck right now. And the reason why that is because it's just really solid effect negation and decent on both your turn and your opponent's turn. For that reason, I think it would make a really good side deck card as well. Next up though is going to be Raigeki, which I think is a solid side deck card here. I'm going to put Dark Hole, which is right over here, into the really good category. I'll talk about them at the same time. Both these cards are board wipes, which are great. They're destruction-based board wipes, which are not the best around. There are a lot of cards that are immune to destruction effects, so keep that in mind. But the reason why I have Dark Hole higher is because we want to have access to a card that'll get rid of something like a Ibli on our side of the field, so we can continue to link summon or special summon monsters, which is really valuable. It's also really good against cards that would just prevent you from doing things while it's on their side of the field. It also gets rid of a card that you have, so you can activate evenly matched from your hand or infinite impermanence from your hand as well. So just keep that in mind. But again, really good cards, both of them. They bait out negates at the worst case, but Dark Hole I think has a lot more applications at the current moment. That's why it is in the really good category compared to the solid category. Next up though, in my opinion, the best side deck card right now, it is the thumbnail card, Kurikara Divine Card. I don't know why I keep saying Divine Kara Kurikara. Anyways, Kurikara Divine Card, absolutely fantastic card. It is so good against so many different strategies. It just forces so much for your opponent to play around. And if you're in a situation where you can just bait your opponent to just giving up like one negate or something, then you can actually just bring out Kurikara and just blow up your opponent's board, which is absolutely amazing. Fantastic card out there. And it gets you a body too, just great. Next up is going to be Dark Ruler No More, another card I put into the top tier. You know, all the top tier cards are coming up first right now. That's crazy. Anyways, the Dark Ruler No More is fantastic against a lot of different strategies. Think of something like Sprite. Sprite is really good in the current format. It's going to have some weaknesses going in the next format, but Dark Ruler No More just shuts the deck down. There are certain strategies that this deck just doesn't, or this card rather, is kind of a moot point. You don't care about it at all. Something like Labyrinth or even Trap Tricks. But the card itself gets around so many issues, which you kind of have to use. I think it's just a fantastic card to play in the side deck. You really want to have access to it almost at all times, just in case when you go second, if your opponent brings up a crazy board. Next up is going to be the Grave of Super Ancient Organisms. Now, this card here, I really want to pick them up when they came out in one of the latest OTSs, and I'm happy that I did, but I really didn't end up using it, and I think that it's for a reason. The card itself, right now, is good in certain areas, but it really depends on the deck you play. If you're playing a deck like Sprite, then sure, why not? But if you're playing any other deck, something like Labyrinth, or if you're playing Sword Soul, or if you're playing something like Kashtira or Branded, the card does nothing because it is reciprocal. So it stops you and your opponent from using level 6 or higher monster effects, so keep that in mind. Next up is going to be DD Crow. I'm putting this into the niche category. I think right now, these are just outclassed by the Bestials, which I'll put into the really good category. Now, DD Crow is a fine card to have. It can get rid of any card in the graveyard, which is nice, not just lights or darks. So just keep that in mind, but it just doesn't get you the body on board, which can be problematic. So it's just essentially a -1 in advantage. It can be more impactful than that, but just keep in mind it isn't always going to be as impactful. Meanwhile, Bestials, I'm talking about the Bestial package of 2 Magnamut and one Druid's Worm is very strong because not only does it get you a body on board, it gets you follow up, they replace themselves, they have extra effects, and it gets rid of the monster that you have in your opponent's graveyard or your graveyard as well. Just a fantastic card here, fantastic groups of card. Would highly recommend playing Bestials if you can. They're not as good right now as they have been in the past, but still very strong options. Next up is going to be Eradicate Epidemic Virus. This card we're going to put into the really good category. It's only good in like 1 or 2 decks. Really, it's going to be only one. That's Labyrinth. That's the only deck that's really seeing play with this card here. Really strong option. Has a lot of utility and just a way to just win the game like that. But it has certain terms when it's just like dead. If you see it, great. If you don't see it, it's a useless card in your deck and really does absolutely nothing for you. So keep that in mind. Next up is going to be Rivalry of Warlords. I think Rivalry of Warlords is I'm going to say a niche card, a niche floodgate, which is kind of weird to think about. I just think there's better floodgates currently, so for that reason I'm going to put it over here. I think that actually goes unmatched is going to be in the Y category, just nowhere near as impactful right now as it has been in formats past. And honestly, the most impactful floodgate right now that's based on like attributes or types on the field is going to be, in my mind, Tikaboo, which I'm actually gonna put these things like this. I think this is more I'm gonna keep Goes Match and Y. Either way, I think that Tikaboo is a fantastic card to have access to in your side deck because a lot of decks can play around. Something like Vanquished Soul can just main the card. Something like Branded can play around it decently well. So you have quite a few different things that you can do with it. Rivalry, on the other hand, is not as good right now because there's more restrictions on it right now, and for that reason I think that it just falls off a bit short and goes in, like I said, even more than that. I think that's just not the format for Goes in Match right now at all. Next up is going to be another card joining the Y category, being Chaos Hunter. I see this card included in so many different side deck or going second card tier lists, and I always want to talk about this, but the card itself is not a good card right now. It barely saw any play in tier format, and why would it see play in a format right now which is so much less reliant on a format like something like tier format or banishing? I know there's Cashier and everything, but that's like the one deck that does it, so keep that in mind. It's just nowhere near as impactful. Next up, there's going to be Macrocosmos. I'm also putting this into the Y category. The reason why it's going to Y is because there is a card on here, where is it? Dimension Fissure, there we go, Dimfizz, which I think is just a better Macrocosmos. Yeah, there's things that it can banish versus Macro can't, or vice versa, but Macrocosmos is a trap card that you have to flip up. You cannot use it as proactively, and there's very few decks that use these cards well. It's going to be like Kashtira and Flu, and that's really, and I guess maybe Exosister. Either way, you really don't want to use these cards too often. I think Dimfizz is slightly better, just not to the point where it's overpoweringly better, and that's why it's a niche still, but Macrocosmos, just don't bother. Play other cards. There's so many better options. Next up, we're going to talk about a few different cards. We're going to talk about the Kaijus right now. There they are. So, Kaijus. Regular Kaijus here, I'm putting into the really good tier. I think pretty much everyone is playing regular Kaijus in their deck right now for good reason. It's a fantastic set of cards to have access to. You can play not just the 3 Gamma Seal, you can go with like a Gamma Seal, like a Darla, and a Kamungus, for example, and I prefer the ways to mix them up because you want to have access to ways to beat over your own Kaiju, which is really nice instead of just crashing. But in general, Kaijus are good to get rid of these random towers, something like a Purely Noir, or something like a Boral End Dragon. There's a lot of really good options that are amazing towers that just fold to Kaijus, so I think that having access to Kaijus are really good in the side deck. On the other hand, I think that Winged Dragon of Mara's Sphere Mode is currently a solid card, and so is Lava Golem. The reason why is for 2 different reasons. Number 1, Lava Golem requires your normal summon, which sucks. If it didn't require your normal summon, I think it would be in the really good, maybe even top tier category. And a lot of decks, they require their normal summon, so losing out to that is really unfortunate. On the other hand, there is Winged Dragon of Mara's Sphere Mode. If this card here was the same as, just again, 2 summons, it'd be great. Not a lot of decks go through 3 summons or have 3 summons, 3 monsters on their side of the field at the end of their turn, so it may or may not be a very useful card. If we were in a format that had more monsters being on the field at a given time, then I would say yes, we can put it into the top tier category because it is that good. But for now, I think solid is the way for it to go. Next up is going to be Herald of the Abyss. I think this is a really good Yu-Gi-Oh card. Essentially, it forces your opponent to choose a card and send it to the graveyard, which gets around a card like Purely's, or a deck like Purely rather, which forces, if it's like your card, your opponent's card effect. forces the card to leave the field. In this case here, because this is your opponent actually making the choice, it does not trigger anything, which is really, really good. I think it's the Pearly Street or something like that. That's the one that does it. I'm blanking on the full name of it right now. Either way, the Herald of the Abyss is a fantastic card for that reason. Recently got a nice reprint in an OTS pack, so make sure to pick it up. I believe it's a common or a super right now, so again, keep that in mind. Next up is going to be Different Dimension Ground. I think this is a Y card. Why play this card right now? Yeah, you can banish the cards, sure, but it's a trap card. It's slow, has no real appeal. It was seeing very little play in tier format when the decks really love to send cards to the graveyard. It's just surprising to me right now that it's still even considered to be a side deck card. Either way, I digress. Next up though is going to be Dimension Shifter, I should say. This card is a fantastic card. I'd say it is probably the best hand trap right now if your deck can play it. Your deck has to be able to play it, and not a lot of decks can do it. We're looking at like Blue, Kashtira, Exosister. Yeah, that's really good. There's not many decks that can actually afford to play this card here. But when you can play it, it is so good against so many different strategies. For that reason, I have to put it in the top tier. Next up is Change of Heart, just a really solid card all around. Yeah, it targets, which is the worst thing about it, but it's just 1-for-1 exchange. If you target a Baron de Fleur, your opponent has to negate it, or you get the effect to negate and the pop as well. So it's just free negation baiting no matter what. Next up is Dino Wrestler Pankratops. I think Pank is a really good card. I love Pank. I think it's one of my favorite cards ever. The fact that it came out as a common, which is great for budget purposes, is really powerful. It's a free special summon, huge body, so you can attack over cards and pop a card, really good. It essentially represents a 1-for-2, which is amazing for me. Next up is going to be Book of Moon. I love Book of Moon as well, my absolute favorite cards of all time. Again, first of all, I love the colors of it, really ocean vibes either way. Book of Moon is a great card because it can be used offensively and defensively. It's a great going first and going second card. For that reason, putting into a side deck, if you don't know what else to put, if you're running low on space, you can't really go wrong with Book of Moon, where just like Change of Heart, it just base negation at the worst case scenario, so keep that in mind. Next up is Denko Sekka. I'm gonna put Denko Sekka in the niche category. It's good against two decks exactly. One being Labyrinth and the other one being Traptrix, and I just think that there are better options right now. You have access to Evenly Matched, you have access to Cosmic Cyclone, Feather Duster, Twin Twister, etc. There's so many, Lightning Storm even, there's so many good options that you don't really need to have Denko Sekka right now in my mind. Moving on, we have Forbidden Droplets. I think this is a solid Yu-Gi-Oh card. Wow, Droplet is a fantastic card. It's a really amazing card. It's just not the format for it. And on top of that, it requires so much resource management. You have to get rid of a lot of cards to negate a big board. And even then, it can be stopped by spell cards if you don't send a spell. So just keep that in mind. Droplet has its weaknesses. It is a good card, but right now it's not the format for it. And there's a lot involved in actually getting it online. Next up though, we're gonna go Triple Tactics Thrust. I'm gonna put this straight into the top tier category, and I'm also gonna go ahead and flex my Ulti Triple Tactics Thrust, which I just picked up from OTS or from locals today, which was absolutely incredible. I'm just super lucky. They're really happy about it. But honestly, the card itself is fantastic. Really, really good at getting you practically anything you really need for a given situation. You want to get access to Thrust? Get Thrust. You want to get access to something like any trap card that you need, Dimensional Barrier, or something like Evenly Matched. You have access to it there as well. Just a really strong card that if you can afford to play it, I would recommend it. It is allowing you to just raise the consistency of your deck as well. That's why we have it here on as well. Next up is going to be Super Poly. It's not the format for Super Poly just yet. Eventually, it will come back. It's a great card to have access to. I think eventually it's going to be really, really strong because you just can't respond to it. It just takes away a lot of your opponent's board. At the worst case, it's like 2-for-1 because you can do, or 3-for-1, I should say, depending on because if your card, your Super Poly, you discard, and then maybe a card you control. But you can go for OTK pushes that way, but most of the time it's going to be a 2-for-2 or something even a 2-for-3. So keep that in mind. Really strong card, has a lot of utility, and depending on your extra deck space, it can be an amazing option. Next up is going to be Triple Tactics Talent. I think this is another amazing top tier side deck card. One of the best pulls off of Triple Tactics Thrust because most of the time it's going to be live as well. Either lets you draw 2 cards, either lets you look at your opponent's hand, shuffle one back, which is really good for hand knowledge, or take control of a monster, non-targeting. Really good. All 3 are fantastic effects and are ban-worthy effects at that, with a really heavy restriction on it too. I think that this card here is arguably one of the better cards to have in your main deck that's on this list here. It's great in combo decks, it's great in control decks, and if you see your opponent's hand, you're very likely going to win the game, assuming you can still make a pretty nasty end board. Next up is going to be Summon Limit. I think Summon Limit is a solid card as well. It you have to use the right deck. Certain decks will just keep vomiting their decks out, their cards out rather, every single turn. It's not going to be effective for it. But if you're building a deck and just saying break my board, and then you have access to Summon Limit on top of that, it makes it really hard for your opponent to do that. They have to have very specific cards to take care of that. So Summon Limit seeing play is not surprising. I do think it is one of the better side deck cards right now, but it takes the right deck, and there's very few right decks for it. Next up is going to be Nibiru. I think Nibiru is a really good hand trap, one of the better ones out there. Is it going to be better than something like Dimension Shifter or Droll? I don't think so right now. There are decks that it's really amazing against. There's decks that just don't care about it right now either. Think of something like Labyrinth. They don't really care about it. Think of something like Kashtira. If they're going Arise Hard Pass, they don't care about it. There are other decks like Sprite. Depending on how soon they get to Gigantic Sprites, they don't care about it. So there's sometimes it's really bad, but in the decks that it's good against, my god, it is so good against those decks. So just keep that in mind. That's why having it really good. Next up is a Lightning Storm. I think a Lightning Storm is actually on the same level as Raigeki. Reason being is it's basically Raigeki sometimes, or Harpy's Feather Duster, but there's a lot of restrictions on it. You can only activate if you have no cards, or no face-up cards I should say, and at the same time it's only attack position monsters. It's at 2 for a reason. It's a good card, but I don't think it's the format for it because there's just better options, and you still want to be able to just Dark Hole your own Iblia away, because with the Iblia on the field you can't even use Lightning Storm. So keep that in mind. Next up we have Harpy's Feather Duster. I think this is a top tier side deck card. Reason being is, again, it is free. There is no problem with it, and we've all seen what happened. I think it was in Nationals or UK Nationals, where I think it was Sunseed Jess just used this card here and just blew up 5 back row from a Labyrinth player and just won the game from there. Yeah, I think this card here keeps a lot of these back row decks in check and is definitely a card that sees play in pretty much every single side deck right now. Next up we have Retaliating Sea. It's niche. There's very few decks that can take advantage of this well. There's very few decks that you want to use this against. Something like Branded is great because you use Branded Fusion to be able to special summon a monster. You can get this out and just make all these monsters, all these cards they sent to the graveyard be banished instead, which is nice. But again, it doesn't come up as often. There are better options. You'd rather play something like Anti-Spell or something like a Droll, Ash, Dimensional Barrier, even Dark Ruler to an extent is better than Retaliating Sea against Branded. So just keep that in mind. Not as good. I would say there's other options. It's teetering onto the Y category. And then finally, our last card for the video, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite cards to play in the side deck ever, and that's going to be Solemn Judgment. I think Solemn Judgment is absolutely incredible, definitely a top tier card and really good in most formats as well. Anyways, that is going to be it for this video. If you guys enjoyed the tier list, if you guys have any questions or any complaints about how the tier list shook up, then let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to read them. Also, make sure to leave a like on the video if you did enjoy. At 60 likes, I will know to bring you guys more tier list content. I also want to thank you guys for watching and make sure to subscribe as well. We are super close to 1,000 subscribers, and hopefully we can get there by the next couple of weeks. I'm hoping to get there before my wedding in September, so fingers crossed. Let's go ahead and just wrap it up from there. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time.